Okay, well, thanks everybody for coming. I'm glad to be here. I've been working with Yuping for the last maybe 2 or 3 years now to do more tree tapping stuff here in the Intermountain West. It's great to be here. We have a really good day today, especially since it froze last night, and it's going to be in the 40s today. So we're actually going to collect some sap this afternoon too, with any luck, which I think we'll have. So, a little background on myself. I used to run the Maple Research Center for Cornell University for 13 years. I loved that job. It was working with producers all over, not just New York, but the country, to develop the maple resource further. Okay, and so you have maples all across the country. We're fortunate that we have a lot here in Utah, and I didn't get to do that much when I was at Cornell coming out here, but now 7 years ago I left my position with Cornell to start my own company, the Forest Farmers. We have close to 10,000 acres of forest in New York and Vermont. We tap 150,000 maple trees every year and do a lot of other tree saps and syrups as well. In addition to that, I also have, I do a lot of research and education similar to what I did for Cornell, but now just privately through the Red Maple Institute. So glad to be here, and I'd like to get to know all of you and what you want to get out of today. So we want to make this workshop as useful, interesting, productive as possible for you guys. So first we'll start with Abby, and we'll go through, and if you could just tell us your name, where you're from, and what your previous experience with tapping is, what you're hoping to learn today. This is hobby scale, right? So nobody's doing this to make money, okay? A hobby you generally spend money on, right? Okay? And everybody here could buy maple syrup at the store cheaper than you can ever make it. I can guarantee you that, okay? Unless you get a lot of trees. You said you have a lot? No, in the...
Yeah, both.
How many?
I don't know. I haven't been in inventory.
How many acres?
Previous at Maple next thing.
Okay, so it's possible you could make money. Everybody else, you're just going to try to not lose too much money on your hobby. Okay? And enjoy it in the process. Okay? There are a lot of trees out here. Generally, in the East Coast, we try to think of trees need to be at least about 9 inches in diameter before you start tapping them. That's considered the conservative tapping guideline. Let them get to about 9 inches, and that's maybe 40, 45 years old, average tree in the East. Out here, a lot of the big tooth maple are between 5 and 9 inches. Okay, so if you wait for them to get to 9 inches, there's just not that many around. Okay, so you can tap smaller. You got to be conservative. You have to be careful and mindful about it. But there's a lot more trees out there because in Utah here, you see we have total of about 30 million big tooth maple, and with box elder, another. Sorry, let me show this over this. Let me give you an overview of this first. So the two biggest species we have here in Utah in the forest, big tooth maple, Acer grandidentatum, and then box elder, Acer negundo, which is also known as Manitoba maple or ash leaf maple. Okay, they grow in the prairies and they grow all over the country, right? Usually in the stream canyons around here. Okay, big tooth maple will be up on the hills, box elder in the canyons and the streams. Okay. And it's broken up in like, where do you find these trees, okay? So other federal means basically like Bureau of Land Management, Park Service, that kind of stuff. There's private land, there's state and local government, and then there's the Forest Service, okay? And that's in Idaho, and then same thing here in Utah. In Idaho, just under 10 million. In Utah, just over 30 million of big tooth maple. And then with box elder, there's not many in in Idaho, and not many in Utah either. Okay, so it's really big-tooth maple in the forest. Where you see box elder often is places that aren't considered forest. They're more accessible, though. Like, this is forest land. This data comes from the U.S. Forest Service inventory of the forest. And so there is more box elder than this, but on the forest is where you see that. Okay, and this is if you took all the trees, and if you had to have 9 inches or greater, you can see how much less it goes to, that there's only 2 million in Idaho and 5 million in Utah. So that's why we really need to be looking at trees in that 5 to 8 inch diameter class. And if you really want to have more of a potential industry here. Now, for people who are just doing it as a hobby, you really only need a few trees. Okay. Okay, so let's talk about a little bit about the history and how we started sugaring here in North America. Who can tell me what this is right here? There's an even better name for that. It's a sapsicle, yes. Excellent, yes. An icicle from sap, okay? I took this picture. You can see it's a clear, this was in the morning after a clear night. So a branch had broken on this maple. And whenever you have a wound on a maple tree, when you have the right temperature conditions, you're going to have sap dripping out, okay? And, on those clear nights where the temperature is just dropping, right? So the sap's still in the tree, still falling out, but when it's getting exposed to the air, it's freezing. And so it's freezing and continue to freeze down that icicle. You have that huge, nice, now icicle made of sap, which is really sweet, okay? So I think one of the best theories for how people the natives initially discovered that maple trees have this sweet sap is that they found one of these.
So can you just walk around, break branches, and
Sure.
the next morning collect all the sap metals?
Yep.
Sounds a lot easier.
Yep. It doesn't happen that often. You have to have the right temperature difference, right? You don't get these very often. I've been involved in this for 20 years, and when I saw that, I was like, oh, great, I got to get a picture of it, because you don't see them that often. But it can happen. You could try it with the tree. One of the best community-based sugaring programs in the country started in Shepherd, Michigan, because they had planted all these trees in the streets. And then they got, okay, well, to put it in a budget item that we're going to go prune all the trees this year. Say like 30 years later, well, these trees need to be pruned. So we'll go through and prune them. And they did it in the winter. And then all of a sudden, all these trees were dripping sap all over town. And somebody said, well, let's not let that go to waste. And they started collecting it, and that was the start of this big community-based sugaring program in Shepherd, Michigan. Okay, so we drill a little hole in the tree to do a little bit of damage. The tree easily heals over, and we can collect that sap. But anytime there's any wound, you're going to get sap coming out of that tree when the right conditions are there. Okay, the natives, they didn't have very sophisticated technology to process the sap. Okay, you can see right there, you can see these tongs with hot rocks. They would have a fire heating rocks and then put those rocks into a hollowed out log, and the heat from those rocks would evaporate the water off. That's really inefficient. That's a lot of work. Okay, so the fact that they were able to do this shows a lot of dedication and perseverance, and ingenuity to figure out how to do it, because they didn't have these iron kettles. When the Europeans came over, brought the iron kettles, brought a lot more technology, so there was good interaction between the natives teaching the Europeans about how to do it, and then the Europeans improving on the technology to make it a lot more efficient. This is still really inefficient. Most of that heat is going not to the boiling off the sap. Okay, and in the early part of this country, like there was a lot of interest in, they weren't doing this in Europe. And so when they came, and when it became a big thing here, like there was this great quote by Thomas Jefferson: everybody should have, plant not an apple orchard, you got to plant a maple orchard as well. Okay, there was like a big push to make your sugar from maple trees here in North America. And so people did plant them, and they planted hedgerows all over. The trees they saved were also the maples. Remember, most of the East Coast was cleared. You had almost full clear cut of the eastern forest for agriculture. And the trees that they left were the ones that they could get sugar from. So maple became a much bigger and dominant part of the forest. People planted maples, people saved them. This became basically North America's tree for its sugar, because that was a sweetener. I mean, there was no high fructose corn syrup. There weren't cane sugar plantations. There weren't beet sugar. You wanted sweetness. Everybody loves sweet food, right? Now all of a sudden you had this here. And you can see, like the galvanized buckets, that was the way, that was like the big improvement at the time, okay? And then you went from galvanized buckets, just hauling those back to a place, to now, okay, well, we can put in a metal pipeline and then have some standpipes, and then you're in the woods, you can get it all to the thing. Okay, so that was the first tubing system, was just basically a trough to be able to collect buckets from a tree, and then rather than carrying it all the way down, you can get it there that way. I don't, the pictures here are, I don't think we can get can we get the lights off, or is that going to help? Because sometimes it's going to be a little blurry or fuzzy. You see it better. Yeah, you can't, because I was hoping you could see this better, but now 99 point whatever % of maple syrup now comes through a tubing system like this. There's still a lot of people go out there hanging buckets and stuff, but that's all hobby stuff. There's probably, at least 60 million taps out there every year between the US and Canada, and over 59 million of them are on tubing. Okay, so, and this makes it a lot easier. We'll get into that as well. And we're actually going to, this afternoon, we're going right up the road a little bit to set up a tubing system. And we have the supplies. You're going to be able to see how it's done. We'll teach you how to do it. And then you can figure out, you can take some of the supplies home and go do it yourself. Okay? And I'll show you how to use the tools to do it, because it makes it a lot easier. Okay? You don't need to. We'll show you how to do it with and without the tools, because nobody's going to go out and buy a $300 tool to put together for 5 trees. Right? Remember, in your hobby, you're trying to lose less money. Okay. People started, building larger sugaring operations and hauling sap to one central place, to a sugar house. Okay, so people were building sugar houses specifically designed for making syrup. Okay, and whether it was horses or tractors, between tubing to different spots, or hopefully your tubing goes right to your sugar house. But sugaring became more commercial. People were doing a lot as sustenance, but then it became a bigger industry. And you had now these big evaporators, and maybe multiple evaporators if you have a lot of sap. So there, it definitely took off, and is now, if you didn't have that type of technology, everybody who's had the 50-year love affair with syrup, you couldn't afford it. It wouldn't be there, because it's just so hard to make. This is one of those things, the reverse osmosis, that removes most of the water before you boil sap. Anybody here who's going to do it, you're going to collect your sap. You're going to have this sap that's maybe 2% sugar, and you're going to boil a lot of sap for a long time to get a little bit of syrup. Okay? you couldn't do that on a large scale. You couldn't have maple syrup being sold in the grocery store at any type of reasonable price if you weren't taking out 90% of the water, 80 to 90% of the water before you boiled it. And that's what these types of machines do today. And you have much more efficient evaporators as well. All that heat is right in there. All the gases are being combusted. You know, like you're trying to get very efficient, because one of the challenges with maple syrup is that you are removing about close to 40 gallons of water for 1 gallon of syrup. Very energy intensive process. So you have to try to be as energy as efficient as possible. Okay, so we're going to talk a little bit about, we got a little bit, that's a very short overview of the history of sugaring, okay, just to give you a sense of where we've been, where we're at now, okay. Now I'm going to talk about 10 of the top reasons why, you know, everybody who came here today, you may have came because you're interested, you don't know if you want to do it. I'm going to try to convince you that you should all do it, okay? Everybody should leave here with some supplies to go tap some trees, and you're going to wind up doing it. Any questions before we move on? Yes?
So, could you talk about the efficiency of boiling it down? Does the actual boiling change the flavor? So, doing like the reverse osmosis, does that change the flavor versus just having it over a pot over a fire?
Yes. So the more you boil it, the darker it becomes, the stronger the flavor. So when you use reverse osmosis, it doesn't need to boil as long, so you generally make lighter syrup that's not as strong flavored. There's a lot of controversy in the maple industry back east about, you know, like, well, RO changes the flavor. It's not as good as it used to be. The reality of it is maple syrup really wouldn't exist as a commercial product without reverse osmosis. So it's kind of a moot point. Okay? And light syrup tastes great. You'll have some of it over here. You know, so yeah, it's not as dark if you don't boil it as much, but that's all right. You were asking about coppicing? Yeah. So, can you elaborate on that question?
Yeah, I know they've been experimenting with coppicing maple trees.
Oh, yeah, there was maybe about 10 years ago or so, they did some research at University of Vermont to look at growing trees, and once they get to 2 inches in diameter, then you cut them off about right here. And then you put a suction cap on top with vacuum and you suck sap. And you're supposed to do like, you know, 600 an acre or something. You're supposed to plant them like corn. And it never caught on, most likely because it's just not economical. It's technically feasible, but it takes a lot of effort and time and money to get a tree to 2 inches of caliper. And then to cut it off and then have it then coppice out, and then you cut it off again, coppice out, and so you can do that 3 or 4 times. Okay, but like the amount of sap you get, it's not. And you'll see there's no limit, especially in the East, the number of maple trees is not the limiting factor of getting more sap. And you'll see that in a minute. Yeah. Here, you know, the trees are pretty small and they're kind of coppiced. A lot of them are kind of coppiced already. Like they were cut and then they sprouted back out of the base. And so you have these like clumpy, big tooth maple that might only be 5, 6, 7 inches in diameter. When you have those clumps, what I would recommend is, and are we going to have, when we do it today, we'll run the tubing through them. Let's just say it's a clump of 6 of them. We're going to put either 2 or 3 drop lines, and so you'll just choose 2 or 3 of the stems every year to tap, and to give the other ones a break so that, you know, because the tree's only 5 inches in diameter, you don't want to tap it every year. But it could be tapped every other year or something like that.
Can you explain why you don't want to tap it every year when it's a small diameter? What's
The issue, you are not going to kill that tree, okay? That is not the issue. The issue is you're going to run out of space to tap on that tree. And I'll use this as an example. Okay, so excuse me. When you tap a tree, this is the spout, imagine this is the tree. You're going to move it around. You're going to go like this because you can't be within the column. When you drill a hole into the tree, that creates a wound, and that wound has a stain up and down. And it's like the scarring, like if we cut ourselves, that's a scar. The internal scarring is no longer conducive to sap flow. The tree walls that off. It says, uh-oh, I got a cut. I got to make sure nothing gets in. I'm going to compartmentalize that area. And if the tree is too small and you put too many holes in it, you're going to run out of good spot. Oh, Ping, you got an even better. Look at that. Look at that prop. Okay, great.
But yeah, I mean, out there, I don't know. Good look at it.
Yeah, and we're gonna we'll do some of this afternoon. Okay, we'll look at this and we'll show you how to tap over time on a tree. All right, so sorry, this isn't showing up that great. It's not the lights, though. Is there anything that can be, because they're all showing up kind of blurry. I don't know. Yeah. What I want to show you, that's 1850 right here, and this is every 10 years until about today. Okay? The green is the U.S., the red circle is Canada, and that's annual syrup production. And you can see in the 1850s, we made a lot more syrup in the U.S. than we were making today. Okay? And it was a lot harder. Okay? Nobody would make syrup today if you had to use the technology of the 1850s. Yes?
Do you think that's because we have access to a lot of other types of shipping?
There's a lot of reasons why. Okay? One of the biggest reasons was it was patriotic in the 1850s and 60s to make sugar from your sugar maple trees in the Northeast and not take what was considered slave sugar from the South. Okay? So there was cane being grown in the South, but people did it as their sustenance and they did it as their patriotic duty during the Civil War. So that was the height of syrup production ever, was the Civil War. And they didn't make syrup, they made sugar, because they didn't have a way to keep the syrup. It was easier to store sugar as a dry sugar, so they took it all the way to maple sugar, not maple syrup. Later in the 1800s, when you got the canning technology, people started making more syrup as canned, and because also after the Civil War, we started importing more cane sugar from the South and from the, say, West Indies, Caribbean, and the price of cane sugar dropped below the price of maple sugar, and it all comes down to economics. So when the price of cane sugar dropped below maple, then the maple producer's like, well, then we'll make syrup because people are going to buy cane sugar instead of maple sugar. Okay. And then, this is the early 1900s, the industrialization, people moved off the land, okay? This is also when people were living on farms in the Northeast. And this is what they did in the winter and the spring. Okay? So they saved those maple trees. Those are the ones they didn't cut. Everything else got cleared for pasture. And then they eventually abandoned those farms and stopped making syrup when they moved to the city. Industrial Revolution. Okay? So there's a whole anthropological reason behind how it's not just technology and it's not just where the trees are, how many trees. It has mostly to do with people and industry and economics. Yep.
Did any people out west do this previous, pioneers are pretty desperate in general?
Yeah, great point. I would think, yes, there's not a lot of historical evidence of it. But where there's maples, people were coming from the east. They had done it. They show up here. Hey, that looks like a maple too. It's got you know, it's got bigger teeth on it. It's a big tooth maple, but it's maple. And so I would think people would have done it, but we don't have a lot of evidence about it.
Sugar beets were pretty popular, weren't they?
What's that?
The sugar beets industry was pretty big here.
Well, sugar beets didn't become popular till later. So the technology to extract sugar from sugar beets became later, past the pioneering times. Yeah.
Sugar beet processing wasn't invented until the late 1860s. And so, by 1850, sugar was more expensive, and the primary source in the U.S. Of sugar was honey or maple.
Yeah, exactly. And so you were getting some coming up from, say, the Florida or the Caribbean of cane sugar, but not nearly like it is today. Yeah. So maple is now, rather than honey is, you know, it's always been there, right? Maple, as I said, you know, went from, maple sugar was the staple source of sugar, to now maple syrup is more of a luxury syrup, much higher priced than any other syrups in the store. And maple sugar is even higher luxury sugar. Okay. So this is around 1980. You can see what happened in Canada. This is due to reverse osmosis and tubing. Vacuum tubing to get more sap out of the trees. Reverse osmosis to be able to remove that water and make more syrup. So this technological advances there allowed Canada to go crazy with it, and now the U.S. is right behind. This is a little outdated. U.S. is probably about there right now, and Canada is about there right now. The industry is growing at a very fast rate. Okay, it's one of the fastest growing ag industries there is. Because the technology has made it relatively easy. Okay? Anybody who makes syrup is going to tell you it's not easy. There's a lot of work, it's a lot of time. But compared to what it used to be, it's a walk in the park. And if you have the right technology and you know things are going well for you, it is actually pretty easy. You know, when you, especially on a larger scale where you have really efficient technology. There's evaporators now that you just hit some buttons on your phone and it does all for you. Okay? You're not cutting wood all summer to be able to feed an evaporator nonstop. You know, like sugaring can be a lot of work. And it can also be a lot of fun. I mean, like that's what, if you like to do that. But as we talked about, these technological advances, anybody here can collect sap relatively easily and process it relatively easy. It's not going to be too difficult. Woodland Hills is a perfect example of this, and I'm so glad Greg brought it up before. Like maple syrup's the byproduct of the community building at Woodland Hills around maple, because it really brings people together around this great byproduct of maple syrup in the spring, where you know, like it's been, you know, cold winter. You know, you finally, it's nice in the spring, you get out there, you're collecting sap, you're boiling it down, it's awesome. People have these pancake breakfasts, or, you know, when do you have your festival?
Third week in April, third Saturday.
Okay, so the season might be done by then, probably.
Yeah.
Okay, a lot of times the festivals happen right during the season as well. You know, sometimes you have it right at the end because, you know, especially if it's your livelihood, you're just working. You don't have time to go party. You got to make your income from syrup, you know, so it's like, it's all hands on deck, and then at the end of the season. It's like in Vermont, last weekend in April every year is the big Vermont Maple Festival. As soon as the season's done, big, huge festival. Same thing with Woodland Hills. And it really does get people together, and Woodland Hills is one of the best examples of that. The demand is continuing to rise. I mean, you wouldn't have the production going like that if demand wasn't also going at the same rate. Okay? So there's lots of reasons why demand is going up as people choose local, healthier, better for you sweeteners, trying to get rid of the high fructose corn syrup and the cane sugar, all that stuff. The health benefits of maple, you know, it's a sugar, so it's not your health panacea, right? But there's lots of overconsumption of sugar out there. One of the reasons why is because a lot of the other sweeteners are so cheap. They get put in everything, okay? And if you spent your money on maple as your sweetener, you're going to eat less sweets, number one, because it's more expensive. But also, there's been tons of research looking at the health benefits of maple versus the others. You're not going to see that well, but maple is just the sap boiled down. It's one ingredient, simple. It's got those natural health properties. It's got the polyphenols. It's got the antioxidants. It's got a lot of minerals. If you're going to choose to have a sweetener, maple is the healthiest option out there. You know, this picture is one of our friend's kids having a soda made with the soda stream. All it is carbonated water and maple syrup. Okay? Those parents would never let that 4-year-old have a Diet Coke or whatever, a Pepsi, right? But they'll let them have a maple soda because it's just water, carbonation, and maple syrup. Yeah.
There's a guy that I helped set up a system now, and so that's why we put him in our system. Yeah.
He's a smart guy.
Yeah.
Yes, no doubt. There's tons of maple trees. There's over 2 billion maple trees. This is, sorry, Utah's didn't make the cut on this, but there's sugar and red maple, the top 2 tree species. There's like over 2 billion of them that you could tap in the U.S. We're hardly using any of them. This is the percent that is used. These are a little out of date, but you know, it's probably up to 5 or 6% in Vermont now. Okay? And that's by far the biggest state. Every other state is 1% or less of the trees are being used for syrup production. So you don't need to go plant a field to maples. Just go out into the forest that they're not being tapped. Trees, big trees already existing, and the bigger the tree, the more sap you get. Okay. This is really true on the East Coast. It's really not true here in Utah because your maples aren't worth anything for timber. Sorry. Okay. On the East Coast, sugar and red maple are 2 of the most valuable, especially sugar maple, those valuable trees for timber. So if you want to keep, if you want to keep nice, big, this tree could be worth a lot of money. That could be a lot as timber. But once you cut that down, it's gone. Okay? And if you tap that tree year after year, you can get revenue from that. And eventually, you're going to make more money from the syrup off that tree than you are from the timber. And you get to keep that tree standing. So it provides the economic rationale to keep these mature forests full of big, healthy trees. So rather than some people saying, oh, you don't want to tap the trees, you're going to hurt the trees. Best thing you can do for trees like this is to tap them, to make sure that they stay standing rather than have the risk of them getting cut down because somebody's always going to be knocking on your door that they're going to give you a bunch of money to cut those trees down. And eventually you might say yes because you need the money.
I have a question.
Yes.
If they tap that tree, does that, so if they tap it for years and years,
Yep.
does that tree kind of expire for being tapped?
No.
I just wondered if like it reaches its limit and then if they could use it for
It's a great question. Anecdotally, trees like this have been tapped by 7 generations of families, same tree, year after year. And then the scientific part of it is we've done research looking at the growth rates of tapped trees versus untapped trees. Trees tapped with just a bucket versus high vacuum where you're sucking a lot more sap out of the tree versus not tapping. And there's essentially no difference in the growth rate or longevity of those trees. Yep.
If a tree's been tapped for a long time, does it affect the timber quality?
Yeah, great question. I think I might get to that later because I might have some pictures. I think so. Generally speaking, though, a quick answer to your question, all the tap holes are right down in here, so it affects the first log, that first 8-foot log.
The most valuable one.
And then the rest of it, the rest of it is fine. If you do the right marketing, those tapped logs, those logs that have taps, you can see all the holes, you turn that into specialty tap hole maple lumber and you sell that for much more. But you have to do the marketing because the sawmill just wants to sell white lumber, which is what the commercial sugar maple is, just they want clear white. So they're going to pay you less because it's got holes in it on the most valuable log.
Similar to our blue stain fungus in our beetle kill trees here.
Yeah.
It's a specialty product, so you bring it to the sawmill, they're going to pay you less for it.
Yep.
But then when you go to Lowe's to buy it, they're going to charge you more for it.
Exactly. Yep. For sure. Yep. As I said before, nobody here is going to make money on it, but you could actually. All right. The only way you're going to make money at syrup production is not making it; it's selling it. Okay. And you're never going to make enough yourselves to sell, but you could make some and then buy in syrup from elsewhere, blend it with yours, and then do all the type of marketing and stuff. That's what a lot of people do on the East Coast, is that they might have a smaller operation, but they focus more on the marketing rather than the production. And people who are out there selling it, like this is a mobile sugar house at a fair, and doing maple cotton candy and selling, maple butter, maple candies, all this other, like maple slushies, all this stuff. Those people can make money at sugaring. The actual producing of the syrup, no, you're going to lose money. Okay. Like these are some of the things that people have had the maple candies before. Yep. Okay. Maple butter. People have maple butter. Okay, that's probably my favorite product. That's just maple syrup boiled down further, cooled, and then whipped into this butter-like consistency. There's no butter. It's not a dairy product. But some people either call it maple butter or maple cream, and it gets confused with dairy because obviously it has those dairy words. But it's just a creamy, buttery consistency of maple syrup, just like peanut butter. Yep. You put maple in other stuff, barbecue sauce. This is maple sugar, to sprinkle on things. A maple soda, like I talked about before. Maple is a sweetener, so anything you would use a sweetener for, you can just switch with maple, and it's better. Has anybody ever had the sugar on snow, the maple taffy like that? Okay, that's another great thing to do. Like you just take snow or shaved ice, take really hot syrup that you've brought up to like 220 some odd degrees, and then pour it on it, and then you just roll it in the taffy. That's what they have it all, like they call them sugar on snow parties. And you have those throughout the northeastern Canada. But even if you're not going to try to make money on it, you're just going to do it as a hobby, it's a great hobby because you take a lot of pride in what you made. That would not have existed if you did not do the work, right? The sap would just be in that tree. But you went out, you collected it, you boiled it down, you made this awesome syrup. Hopefully it's awesome. Hopefully you think it's awesome, okay? You can screw it up, and that's really disappointing, okay, because that's a lot of work. So you want to do it right, and that's why you guys are here, to learn how to do it right, so you don't screw up like I did. I made quite a few mistakes and made some really bad syrup in the past, okay? So everybody makes mistakes. You want to be able to take really great pride in what you make. Like people put it in, there's all these syrup competitions back east, every county fair, state fair, you put it in there. So because people, it's something you take a lot of pride in. You've put a lot of effort into it, and you really should be proud of what you've done. And maple sap, just drinking sap right out of the tree. There's my nephew. And as Abby was saying, the gentleman in Ogden who just uses sap as a drink, he's the smartest guy in Utah, from my perspective, okay? Because maple sap is the best drink in the world. If you go out to buy sap right now at the store, very expensive, okay? You get it almost for free in your backyard, and you can freeze it, thaw it out the rest of the year, It's an incredible drink. You can collect sap infinitely cheaper than you can buy it, because you can buy it. There's companies out there selling maple sap as a beverage. But it's really expensive. And if you try to make maple syrup, it's going to cost you so much more to make it than it is to buy it. So if I were, you might want to boil it, try to make a little bit of syrup. But if I had some trees out here, I would just use the sap for drinking. I wouldn't even try to boil it down. Unless you have at least 10 trees. That's maybe the cutoff of just collect the sap. Maybe boil it down a little, get it a little bit sweeter, because it might not be that sweet. Like, I drink a lot of sap, and about 2.5% sugar is probably ideal. Like, it tastes sweet, it's nice, but it's not overly sweet. If it comes out at like 1.3 or 1.4, which it can sometimes, like the sugar content changes. If it's pretty dilute, it doesn't taste that sweet. It's still good, it's good for you, but it's just not as good. So just sap right out of the tree. You could drink it out of the bucket. You're really not actually, I should mention, these galvanized buckets are no longer legal. Okay? You can't sell maple syrup if you collect sap in a galvanized bucket. Anybody know why? Potential lead contamination from the galvanized buckets. Okay? So don't use those buckets. Okay? You got some plastic ones now, and they don't look as nice. You don't get that, northeast look of the galvanized bucket, but those aren't as food safe as plastic or glass. Yeah, you could. Yeah, exactly. Yep. So nothing galvanized. There was a settlement, California Prop 65 with lead and things. So there was a settlement with the maple industry to make sure that anybody who's selling maple syrup, it's just selling it in California, but that then dictates the rest of the country. Yeah. So you can't use galvanized, and don't use galvanized anywhere in sap collection or processing. Okay, you can't see, that's a horrible picture. I can guarantee that's actually a really good picture on the right thing. What you can't see, there's a spout, and that's a milk jug with snow. Believe it or not. You can look at it there. I mean, you can actually see that. It's awful, the quality. Anyways, that's a good way to do it. You have to really clean out the milk jug, or ideally the water jug, okay? So you don't have to try to, if it just had water in it, that's fine. If you're going to use a milk jug, you got to make sure it's really cleaned out. Anything that you use to collect sap has to be food grade and has to be completely cleaned out multiple times if it wasn't just water, if it had anything else in it. Because the maple sap is going to pick up any flavors from whatever that was. Like the worst instances are people like who use old pickle jars, for sap collection. That's the extreme, okay? But you can just take one of those, take a spout, and then just hang it on there, and then you have fresh, clean sap right out of the tree. Remember, the sap in the tree is essentially sterile. As soon as it gets into the environment, just as sap is, it's great for us to drink, it's good for the trees, it's bringing the trees to life in the spring, it's a perfect medium for any type of microbial growth. It's got sugars and minerals and all that stuff in there. Everything wants to grow in the sap. Okay, so you got to be vigilant in how you collect the sap and how you process, store it, all that stuff. Especially if you're going to be drinking it and not boiling it down. Once you boil stuff down, you've killed everything. Not a big deal. You've pasteurized it through the boiling process. But, yeah, and these plastic bags, those bag-in-the-boxes, you can get wine in a box. Those types of bags inside, those can also be used for collecting. A lot of the Amish, when they couldn't do the galvanized buckets anymore, in Ohio, switch to these plastic bags. And they're simple, easy to use. Yuping, I think you said you had one? Did you say you had a bag? Okay, so we'll show you how to do that this afternoon too. You can also just do tubing down to a 5-gallon pail. Okay. That's another easy way. And we have plenty of tubing. Yuping can give you the tubing and the spout, show you how to do that. That's another horrible picture, but you can see there's a paint strainer on top of this 5-gallon pail. You can't see it, but there is a paint strainer. Okay, and when you go in to collect into the 5-gallon pail, you pour it through the strainer. You just keep anything out, all the bugs out, all that kind of stuff. Okay. Remember, like maple sap, I think is one of the best drinks in the world. You got to treat it as such. Okay, you got to make sure that you've taken care of it really well. 2009, New York Times had a big article on the fact that in Korea, all the sap gets used for drinking, not for syrup. And they have these big festivals there. And I mean, the name of the tree in Korea is called garisei. It means the tree that is good for the bones. Okay? Because of all the calcium, magnesium, potassium that's in the sap. And what people do is, they have these sap, festivals, and you can buy it like in the cartons like that. Look at the trees they're tapping. This is not sustainable. Okay. This hole or that hole, one of those might have got sap, the other one did not. Okay. They're directly within the stain column, right on top of each other. Same thing with this one and this one, right? Right up and down. This one and this one. There's way too many holes on a pretty small tree. Okay? But they don't have, in Korea they have a lot of maple trees. In fact, there's more species of maple in Asia than there are here in North America. But they don't have these huge, expansive maple forests like we have in the Northeast. I'd say it's more akin to what you find here with like big tooth maple in the hills of Utah, okay, where the trees don't get that big and they're not nearly as plentiful. You can't over-tap like this and expect that you're going to continue to be able to get sap. The reason you don't do all this over-tapping is to make sure you can get sap year after year.
How far does that stain column extend? Like, theoretically, tap and then climb up the ladder and tap 5 feet above it?
Oh yeah, you can do that, for sure. The stain column only goes about 6 to 8 inches up and down from the hole. Yeah.
Could those be different holes from different years?
Yes, they definitely are. Yep, and so some of these have healed over. You can see that was from a previous year, it healed over, healed over, healed over, not healed, healed over, not healed, not healed.
But even then you can't go above or below?
No, because even if it's healed, inside, it's still stained. So that's just healed over on the outside, but if you drill a hole right there, you're going to drill into brown wood that's stained and you're not going to get any sap. Yep.
I imagine you're going to get into this, but do you get more yield tapping the lower portion of the tree than
Yeah, great question. The lower you go, generally the more sap you get. Because what you're doing, the sap rises when it's freezing at night. The trees suck the water up through the roots, goes up into the tree when it's freezing, and then when it thaws, it's just pressurizing and coming out down the hole. So you're really not going to get, if your hole is there, you'll get all the sap above it. If your hole is there, you're also going to get this. But this sap is not going to flow up to there on gravity. On vacuum, it just draws it from everywhere. Doesn't matter. But on gravity, the lower you go, the more sap you're going to get. These are all great questions, yeah.
Can you tap a tree in 2 locations in the same year?
You can. And depending on the size of the tree, that second hole might give you twice as much sap. It might not, okay? So in vacuum, it doesn't, okay? So when you have vacuum tubing hooked to it, the one spout is going to be able to draw a vacuum to all different parts of the tree. And if you have a second hole, that's just competing with the first hole. So you don't get twice as much sap with vacuum. So we only do one. No matter the size, the tree has to be like that big before we're going to put a second hole on a tree with vacuum. Then we put them on complete opposite sides of the tree to get them as far apart as possible. You guys aren't going to have vacuum. You have gravity. So, if it's your trees aren't big enough. It's one. I forgot I was in Utah. Yeah, you're never going to have a tree that's more than one tap hole per tree.
Tapping on the north versus south aspect, there are differences in production?
Yeah, great question. People generally start tapping, say, late February, early March after the winter. And it's when it's the first warm days. And of course, the first, if the sun is coming this way, the first side of the tree to thaw out and to start to get sap is on the south side. So there's an old, lore that, the sap only runs on the south side. In the beginning of the season, that's true. But then it runs better on the north side at the end of the season. Okay? So in the beginning, if you're really anxious to get the sap, yes, tap on the south side. But you can't just put all your holes there. You got to work your way around the tree to get the full use of the tree. Because when people tap on the north side in the beginning, and it's not thawed, north side's not running. You can't get sap on the north. But later you're getting it. It's 10 years ago, wow. They do these fasts. Like in Korea, this is where this came from, was that they do these fasts in Korea where you go and you sit in a sauna just drinking sap. Okay? So you're sweating and just replacing the water in your body with sap. That's the only idea behind it. It's like you go on this maple sap fast. I can tell you I've done a lot of maple sap fast during the day. I still eat dinner at night. But when you're working all day and you don't have really time to stop and you're just drinking sap, your body, I'm just wired and just going. Okay? It does give you a lot of energy. And, I don't do like the 3 or 4 day fast, but some people do that. Okay? And because it has all this good stuff in it for you. And this is what, a lot of people's freezers could look like. Because if you have 4 or 5 trees, each tree, around here, each tree is probably going to give you 5 gallons of sap. I would bank on around 5 gallons of sap over the course of the season. So if you have 5 trees, try to round up 25 gallons of sap, but then where are you going to freeze it, right? So, also, a lot of people have chest freezers, and you do a lot of food preservation, right? Okay, so, you're preserving food in July, August, September. You're using it November through March, and then your freezer's pretty empty by March. Well, it's more empty in March than it was in September or whatever, right? So freezers work better when they're full. So your freezer should be full of sap at the end of every sap season. Then you use less energy, and then you can take out a gallon jug of sap in July when it's 90 degrees out, thaw it out, and then drink sap, and it's great.
Question.
Yeah.
How long does sap stay in the fridge good?
In the fridge, it depends on how much contamination happened to it before it went in the fridge. Okay, so if you kept it really clean, it can last in there a week, maybe 2. Maybe, probably not. But, if it's not, if it was kind of already bacteria laden before it went in, only a few days. Yeah.
So following on from that, I guess, is there some sort of pasteurization, sterilization process
Yeah.
you can do with the sap before you store it and then put it in your fridge?
Yeah, you can just boil it.
Just for a bit.
Yeah. But then you got to let it cool off. You don't want to put boiling water in your fridge. Boiling sap in your freezer. Fridge, freezer. Yep. You got a question? Same question? Yeah. Yeah, you can. Some people like the sap when it's completely unpasteurized. If you're going to sell it, which you can't really do it here, they don't have, but it does have to be pasteurized. This is the mineral concentrations of sap. Varies quite a bit. It's all based on the soil type. Okay, so remember the sap is just groundwater that then is getting sucked up by the roots and picking up extra nutrients from the tree. So the soils that the sap started in is going to be hugely influential on the mineral content of the sap that you collect, and then the syrup as well. Yeah.
So does that, I have a large, probably like a 2-foot diameter maple tree. It's in my parking strip in suburban Sandy, Utah. Would that be not a great tree just because you get like road runoff or like fertilizer from the lawn or anything like that?
I think you'd be fine. Yeah. Yeah, I mean, if you were worried about heavy metal contamination, then you'd, because they can pick up the heavy metals, but I wouldn't worry about the road salt or sand or fertilizer.
I know Jesse analyzed like soil versus sap samples for trees he did, and even if there was traces of like arsenic and lead in the soil, it did not carry over to the sap as far as he could detect. So it's a pretty good filter
Yeah.
as far as we've seen.
Yeah, there's more research going on that right now. So I talked about like buying sap versus buying syrup. Okay, so let's just say a quart of sap is $5 plus $1 deposit. So a quart of sap, let's say it's $5. Okay, that means $20 a gallon, and it takes 40 gallons to make a gallon of syrup. So that's $800 in sap to make a gallon of syrup, if you were to buy it and do that. For the time we were experimenting with marketing sap, this back when I was at Cornell, and somebody did buy up all the sap in the store to make maple syrup. So you can imagine paying $800 per gallon just for your raw material before you even started buying it. Okay? So it's way cheaper to just collect the sap than it is to buy it. Yeah.
I see maple water in stores, and I bought it and drank it sometimes. Is it the same as sap, or is it different?
Yeah, so great question. Maple sap is maple water. They're the same thing. The average American thinks of sap as the sticky stuff that falls on their cars from a pine tree. Okay? So, and there's a whole huge functional water category. So you have, coconut water, cactus water, whatever. Like there's all these, water is a category. Sap is not. So maple sap gets called maple water in the grocery store. We sell quite a bit of sap to beverage companies. My company, Forest Farmers, sells sap to beverage companies that use it for bottling. And you have a tanker like this showing up at the sugar house. That's normally like going to a dairy farm to take milk away. Instead, it's taking sap away. Okay, what time is it here? All right, 11:20. So we have 40 minutes till lunch. I'm not going to keep you from lunch, but keep the questions coming, okay? Because these are all great questions, so don't hold them. All right, and we'll go through this relatively quickly. So there's 3 options you have to be a maple producer. I mentioned it before. You can do the whole thing: collect the sap, boil it down, make syrup. Okay. You could lease or let somebody else tap your trees for you, or you could collect the sap and bring it to somebody else. Okay, and those all have pros and cons, but these are the questions that you should ask yourself before really coming to a conclusion how it's going to work for you, okay? So first of all, the limiting factor, generally speaking, is time, okay? So you got to think about how much time you really have available in March and maybe beginning of April here. Like, you start sometime late February to early April, generally the season around here. So think about like how much time do you have available, because that's going to determine a lot of things, but time and money is a limiting factor on most things here. Then it's not just the trees you have. You should count how many trees you have, but then how many do you have access to? So it's, a lot of people say here, you're here, you're interested, you don't have any trees yourself, but how many maybe are in the neighborhood, or you could go ask somebody, like get a sense of like what is available nearby, reasonable access. My experience in talking with most people are very willing to let you tap their trees, especially if you give them a little bit of syrup. Okay? They don't want them, like there's lease rates, like it's $1 per tap per year is a going rate. Nobody wants the $1, right? You say, oh, I'll give you $1 if I can tap your tree this year. No, they don't care. I can give you a little bit of the syrup. That's, first of all, worth a lot more than $1, so you don't want to give away too much. But a little bit of syrup goes a long way. And generally speaking, the forestry community is anti-tapping, because generally speaking, the forestry community wants to use those trees for timber, not for syrup. Okay? All right. So, yes, theoretically you can get a special use permit, but if the person at the Forest Service or whatever thinks that tapping is going to hurt the trees, or doesn't want to deal with the paperwork, or whatever, it's easier to deal with a private landowner than it is with any government agency when it comes to getting tapping rights. Okay. So determine what kind of equipment you're going to have or need. You might still want to go, depending on how many trees you have, you might want to try to boil it down, or you might say, okay, oh yeah, once you start drinking sap, and not just drinking sap, but to cook, like you were mentioning before, you cook rice with it, or soups or stews, use it for your tea and your coffee. Like, you use the sap for lots of different things. You might decide that's better for me, so I need to know what kind of equipment I have to freeze it or filter it or whatever. So think about what kind of equipment you're going to need. How many people want to help, because that's going to impact your time, your trees. How much will I have invest here? It's really lose. Okay? So how much am I willing to spend on this? Okay, it's not an investment. Investments are supposed to make you money. Okay. If you're doing it as a business, think about the marketing. That's the first cardinal rule of all business. Like, where am I going to sell it first? And then, like, once you have a little bit of experience, or just figure out, like, some people just love to be out in the woods collecting sap. I prefer to be in the woods all day, right? Some people love to be in the sugar house boiling it down in syrup. So, depending on your preference, you might want to be someone who just, makes the syrup and somebody else is bringing you the sap, or vice versa. Because you're doing this to have fun. Okay, so do this part that's the most fun for you. Okay. Yeah, this, generally speaking, if you're going to do the whole thing, it's the most time, the most investment, the most potential, most risk, most potential reward. But what I would recommend for this group is everybody has to watch this poem. Have you watched it? Yeah. Okay, so go to go to Google, type in YouTube Vermont Maple Poem. It's 10 or 12 minutes, 13 minutes. It's 13 minutes. It's this guy, Buzz Coons, wrote a poem about moving to Vermont and wanting to be, Yankee ingenuity and go make his own syrup. He wasn't going to go buy it from the store. That's ridiculous. I can get it for free out of my trees. Okay, and so it's the whole story of that, and will convince you that you should buy your syrup and not make it if you're trying to save money. Okay? It's also hilarious. People usually watch it twice because you're laughing so much through the first time you miss a lot of the messages. But it's informative and funny, and you know, yes, you can make syrup and you can not like ruin your life like this guy did. But you know, this is like his story of it, and it's pretty funny. The reason nobody's going to make money on syrup here is because there's huge fixed costs of production to get started. Your variable costs are not that high. You can usually easily cover your labor and your fuel. The two biggest variable costs to make syrup, it's all your fixed costs of buying everything to get started that just makes it almost impossible to ever, like the first gallon of syrup you ever make costs you thousands of dollars for that gallon, you know, because of your fixed cost to get started. And it just shows that this is an old study, but it was one of the best ones done. A small producer, over $4 a pound compared to just over $2 for a large producer. So like the larger you are, there's tons of economies of scale in sugaring. The more taps you add, you get to divide your cost by that extra tap, and so and the extra syrup you make. So that's why my business has 150,000 trees tapped. Okay, because you have to try to make money. You have to be large and have efficiencies and economies of scale. Okay, so let's talk about how we want to collect the sap. We're going to set up tubing this afternoon. We're also going to show you how to hang some buckets. Yuping has a bag, I think. So how you're going to do this, what you decide is going to be based on a lot of different factors. Okay, how many trees you're tapping, number one. Okay, if you're doing hundreds of trees, you're probably not going to put out hundreds of buckets. Okay, you know, you're the only one, sorry, that might be doing hundreds of trees. So you're going to be doing tubing, okay? Generally speaking, unless you have a lot of kids you want to put to work after school. And that's what a lot of kids in the North, you know, like that was like the tradition. Like kids got home from school, they went and collect the buckets. Okay? But that doesn't really happen anymore. If you want to make money, you're going to do tubing, okay? Because you get more sap with tubing than you do with buckets. Topography, like these hills, you know, you got, who wants to go up on a steep hill and collect a bucket and try to carry it down the hill? No, just run the tubing once, have it run down to the bottom. That's great, just go collect from the bottom, okay? Yeah.
So you said you get more sap from tubing compared to buckets. Is it just, it's more efficient to use tubing, or does the tree actually give you more?
The tree gives you more because you can create either a natural or artificial vacuum, and every inch of vacuum you get, vacuum is measured from 0 to like 28 inches of vacuum, and every inch gives you about 6% more sap. So generally speaking, you get 2 to 3 times the amount of sap with vacuum tubing as you do just hanging a bucket. And with 3/16 tubing that we're going to set up today, if you get it on a good enough hill, you can get full natural vacuum, 28 inches to all your trees, and get a lot of sap. If it's on flat ground, you're not going to get a lot more. You'll get some more, but not a lot. Okay. And then the cost and availability. Yuping, I think you got lots of tubing today. How many rolls? You got 3 rolls?
We have lots of buckets too.
We got lots of buckets, 3 rolls of tubing. That's enough for everybody here. For the amount of trees I've heard you say you have. Because you can get, generally speaking, here, you're getting 25 taps per roll of tubing. Okay? So we can give out 75 taps worth of tubing rolls, and then we got the buckets. So yeah, there's plenty. Okay. Yeah. I'm not going to these prices because you guys don't get to pay. You don't have to pay. Okay? You're getting this as a, if you're actually looking at installing a real, like, you might put up a system, you're going to be spending, depending on the density, so that the cost of tubing installation is highly dependent on how dense, how close together your trees are. And then how far it is from the collection site, and whether you want to add vacuum or not. If you're going to pay to somebody else to put it up versus do it yourself, you'll have the skills. Everybody will know today how to put it up themselves. You don't have to pay somebody. Well, you wouldn't pay somebody for 5 trees, you know. But if you wanted to do it on a larger scale, a lot of times people just hire that out because professional tubing installation, how you set up the tubing, how it's maintained, all that has a huge impact on how much sap you get. So people who are doing this as a business, you got to really be careful to do it right. We're not talking about vacuum pumps. 3/16. So this is a bunch of 3/16 lines at the bottom, all going into a one like collection trough here. And the thing about that is that, like if I look out at that hillside up there, if that hillside is full of maple, I'm going to have 7 or 8 3/16 lines going up from the bottom, snaking through the hill, getting all the trees. And then they would all go to just one. You could even have them go to one collection tank right there, or to then a tube that will bring it to your tank. And you'll see when we get out there this afternoon. Okay, how you boil it down. I mean, how many people are even going to buy an evaporator? Yeah, right. So this is where you're going to boil it down. If you decide to try to make syrup, a lot of people just do like a turkey fryer. And the propane cost on that turkey fryer is more expensive than syrup. Okay? So just that, just the propane. We've done the research, okay? So you're going to spend more on propane to make the syrup. You can do it in your kitchen stove. You got to watch that video, okay? You know, that might be a little bit more efficient. You can do like, you can make like, there's a great book called Backyard Sugaring that has like how you can improvise to make your own like little arch and pans, and you can do that outside with wood. If you don't want to spend more on propane than cost for the syrup from the store, you can do that. And that's the kind, like I would just, if I were you, I would just look at like, I would type in like backyard evaporator or homemade boiling down, like type it in to Google and just like see the different options that are out there. What do you think is going to work for you? What do you want to do? Okay, yeah.
So we figure in every 8-ounce bottle,
Yeah.
little tiny 8-ounce bottles, we have $1 worth of propane.
Well, that's not bad considering what you sell it
Yeah.
for. Yeah, that's good.
Yeah, okay.
Okay.
But we're also using RO and evaporator.
Yeah.
And then I don't even calculate natural gas that we're burning. So we take it into the kitchen for finishing.
Yes,
But still, propane, but for us, firewood is free.
sort of. Because if you don't value your time.
Yeah.
Yeah, firewood is free when you don't value your time.
Which we don't.
Yeah, exactly.
We're all volunteers.
Exactly, yeah, and you're doing it for fun, so like it is free, because you're having fun and it's good exercise to get the wood and everything, yeah. So in your sense it is, but like for somebody who's doing it, when you're doing like 40 cords of it to make all your firewood, to make the syrup for your income, it's not free.
What about electric convection, like a portable?
Yep, you can do that. Electric convection is great.
So it's just the temperature, there's no byproduct, no advantage, heat source.
The difference of the heat source is like wood fire generally you get more of a smoky flavor to your maple syrup, especially if you get ashes in there. Okay, which you can ruin syrup that way. I have done it. Okay. I'll give you a history of my initial sugar making. Okay, so I learned about it when I was in grad school. Went on a field trip to our University Sugar Bush. I got real excited about it. I grew up on the fake stuff. I didn't know about real maple syrup. So I got real excited, like, okay, well, I'm going back home next weekend. I know we got some maple trees in the yard. I'm going to tap those and try to make syrup. And I tried to make syrup. I mean, I was a college student, so I had no patience, okay? So like watching a pot boil is not good if you don't have patience, okay? And if you walk away at the wrong time or you forget about it, whatever, then you ruin your mom's 2 best pots and then she doesn't let you in the kitchen anymore. Okay, so then I tried to boil it outside and then, I got the ashes come up, go into the syrup and it tasted awful. Anyways, I decided after that, like 3rd or 4th time I ruined a batch of syrup, I was done making syrup. And I just started drinking the sap. That's it. And freezing the sap, and I've been doing that for the last 20 some odd years. But now I have a business where I make a lot of it, but on a home scale, like I screwed up, lots of people screw up. It's really hard to do it right, to get it to the right density without screwing it up on a very small scale. Much easier to tap 10,000 trees and run a real evaporator than it is to try to tap 2 trees and finish it off and get it to the right density. Because if you get it to too low a density, it can spoil on you. If it's below 66, it can spoil on you. If you get too high, it starts to crystallize. There's a sweet spot there that you got to get to between 66 and 68.9. Yeah.
ruined any big batches?
What's that?
Have you ruined any big batches commercially?
Unfortunately, yes. One time a valve was stuck shut and I did not know that, so sap wasn't coming into the back of the evaporator. So it burned, it didn't burn the front, but it burned the stuff in the back that was, say, 25% sugar. So, yeah. There's an expression that you're not a sugar maker until you've burned your first evaporator. Yeah. Okay. The leasing taps, we're not going to do that. Nobody's doing a contract here. You can sell sap, but really, Greg, why don't you talk about how your community operation works in terms of somebody they're not selling you sap, but they give you sap and they get some syrup. Can you explain that, how that's working?
What's that?
Can you explain how it's working in Woodland Hills, how people you have one evaporator,
Yeah.
but other people are collecting sap, they're bringing it to you.
What we've done, we have a nonprofit association, so people, all of us are neighbors, and we donate the sap, and they bring it in, and we process it all right there, basically in my driveway, and then we return 25% of our total syrup back to our members, back to our participants.
Okay.
And
And maybe is it in proportion of if I have 2 trees versus I have 20 trees, do I get the same amount?
Mm-hmm.
So it doesn't matter how many different trees?
No, we tabulate it all.
Okay.
And we know exactly who's donated what.
Yeah.
And so we divvy it up at the end of the season.
Yeah.
And so our top participant may get 35 bottles of syrup, and our lowest may get 4 or 5.
Okay. Yeah. Great. Yeah. So that is a great way to, it's as Greg mentioned, he doesn't have a ton of fuel cost in that syrup because he's got the efficient technology right there.
And then we sell the remaining 75% at our festival.
Yep.
And we're able to sell out all of our production right at the festival.
Yeah, which is great. Okay, so that That kind of stuff happens on a, say, on a business scale, larger scale, quite often in the Northeast, where people, you know, you bring them somebody like 2,000 gallons of sap in a tanker, you check the sugar content, you know how much syrup that was going to make. That person then gets whatever, 50, 60, or 70% of the syrup that would come out of that, or the value of that syrup. Okay, so those are ways you can do that, but the type of collaboration of somebody investing in the real technology to reverse osmosis and evaporate or boil it down efficiently, and other people bringing the sap to that person, it's a win-win all the way around. Okay, let's go into some of the frequently asked questions about tapping, whether it's going to hurt or kill the trees. I think we covered this earlier, but just to reiterate, it does not really hurt the trees. I would say that the challenge here in Utah is that a lot of your maples are stressed due to drought, okay? And so your trees are maybe not looking that great, and especially if you're going to ask somebody, can I tap your tree? They're going to be like, ah, well, you know, I don't know, like, it might hurt it, and the trees are already stressed. The drought is, the analogy I give is, like a drought here in Utah is basically like that tree getting hit by a bus, and that's pretty awful. Probably going to kill the tree eventually, you know? You're either going to the hospital or you're dead. That's what drought can do to trees here. And tapping it is like scraping your arm when you fell on the ground, okay? So it wasn't good. You didn't want to scrape your arm, but the bus killed you. It wasn't scraping your arm. Like, that's okay. You can do that every day. If people are really concerned about them, the other thing that, you know, the other advantage of it is that if you really love maples, okay, and remember, like I told you about the story before in the Northeast, like they cut down almost all the other trees. They saved the maples because they were useful, because they loved the maples for the sugar that they could provide. If people love maples in Utah as much as they love maples in the Northeast, in Vermont, say, you would do more to try to protect and save these trees. You would do more irrigation on the trees. You know, like, I'm thinking of Greg in your yard, like the ones up by your house that get irrigated by the garden, those are extremely healthy. And the ones on your hillside that don't get irrigated, they look great. Great point, yes. Yep. And you're more likely to also take care of and maybe put mulch around that tree and irrigate that tree, okay? And especially if you're going to be using that tree for syrup, because you love that tree for the syrup, and so you're willing to invest more in that tree to keep it healthy, because that's what you need to do. I mean, tapping the trees is so minor. But if you don't take care of the trees, if you don't, you know, unfortunately, I think we are seeing a lot of dieback on them. Okay, so the drought is a major issue. We talked about the compartmentalization. I think I have some pictures. I'll get to it. The aesthetic. So Greg, do you keep that tubing up year-round? Does the tubing stay up year-round on your hill?
Yeah, it does.
Okay. Does anybody complain about it?
And it probably has a 10-year life, right?
Nah, it can go longer. I mean, the company will tell you, it's 10-year tubing, but it's probably, you can get some more out of it. Yeah. But the question is about, like, tubing often, especially, like, it's such a great community building thing in Woodland Hills. Everybody loves it, but a lot of times landowners don't like to see tubing strung through the trees in the woods. Yeah, so, I mean, because that's a lot of concern people have, and you can choose the tubing color as well. Like, you can do green or light blue, depending on what you want to see for that. You know, this is tubing, like, if you want to cross a road, you can either go underneath the road, you can go up and over, you can't really see that well if you have vacuum, to keep stuff open. You know, like, because around people's yards, like, oh, well, that's the path, but there's two trees there, how do I get around it? You know? So there's different ways of doing that. Whether the tubing stays up or not, you tap in a different spot every year. Whether it's tubing or buckets,
Okay.
you're going to tap, say this is the tree, you're going to tap here, then there, and then there, and there. You're going to move around.
It stays up, but you go and move the holes.
Yep.
Okay.
Yep. Okay. We covered this a little bit before. If tapping is going to reduce the value of the saw logs, yeah.
How often is that?
I have seen some great pictures of moose coming out of a sugar bush with tubing all throughout. Okay. The elk here, I think, is probably the biggest concern. Okay. So it could happen. I mean, they will sometimes, usually they don't bother it, but if they're running fast, getting away, like, they don't care. They run right through it. Greg, the question is, have you had any elk come through your tubing and destroy it?
No.
The bigger issue is not like moose or deer or elk, it's squirrels that love to chew tubing. Okay? So actually taking down your tubing, and when you have a small enough system that you can take that down every year, you got to be able to mark it properly so that you know how to put it back up.
Too much work.
But if you do that, you can actually really properly clean that tubing and store it away, and you're going to get a higher yield because clean tubing results in a higher yield than dirty tubing. And the squirrels don't have a chance to chew it. So it is a lot of work. For Greg, you have probably like 7 or 8 lines that run down to that one shed. Yeah, I'd leave it up too. But some people might want to take it down.
Is there a way to flush it?
Yeah.
Clean it while
Yeah, you can flush it. You can hook up like a hose to it, and got to get a right adapter to get it in there, and then flush it out through every drop line and have it come out. Yep. So this isn't an issue for you guys. There's no value of your saw logs here. Okay. Although eventually, I can envision some of those trees that have been tapped for quite a while at Woodland Hills, and then those trees are starting to die. If I were you, I would tap them a lot. Put 7 or 8 holes in them, and then get a lot of holes in there so that you can then saw that up and make some really nice picture frames or something that you can tap hole maple from the Woodland Hills, because that's actually going to be really valuable. Otherwise, maple is worthless from timber out here. Okay? But yeah, you should definitely have, because you can bring those logs to somebody with a sawmill and have some tap hole maple from, because you got some trees there that probably only have a few years left. And if the amount of holes in there, you're not going to have enough tap hole maple lumber. So I would put some extra in to get it to look good. That didn't show up that well. This is what a tree, say in the Northeast, looks like if it's been over-tapped for too long. This is still good white wood. I know it doesn't look that way. This is good sapwood here. All this stuff here is stained compartmentalized wood from old tap holes. Okay? So you can see after a while, if you've been over-tapping those trees, there's not a lot of good spot to tap left. That's why that tree is down on the ground as a log to get sawn up. And if anybody actually see this, you can look at it after. But you can't really see. But it's beautiful tap hole lumber there coming out of a log like that on a wood miser. That's a tap hole maple cutting board. You can see the different streaks, the staining. It can be very beautiful. You can make a lot of really nice stuff with it. And the great thing about this is that people love maple syrup. They love the story of maple syrup. Every board is unique. Every product you make is unique. Pure white maple lumber is bland. It's just white. There's no story. This has story, this has character, and this is why this is worth a lot more if you do the right type of marketing and development. This one was way over tapped. Okay? All right, this board would be a lot nicer looking if it had 5 less holes in it. Okay, and the reason it's cut down is because it was over tapped, because it wasn't a good spot to tap anymore. But you can see like the chairs, you can make tons of stuff out of it. There was a question over here. I thought I saw a hand.
That was the diameter of that, or the length of that brown wood.
Oh, yeah. Okay. And so, I mean, look at some of these 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. I mean, all in that. Some of these, what I forgot to mention, it used to be that the tap holes were 7/16 in diameter, and now they're mostly 5/16 in diameter. Might not sound like a big difference, but it is. And the smaller the hole you put in, the less stain column you get. So a lot of these holes were from when the trees were 7/16 in diameter, when that was the hole size that was drilled. They determined, the research in the 90s showed that you can put a 5/16 hole in and get just as much sap as the 7/16 under vacuum. So everybody switched it, and then they were called health spouts to keep the trees healthier. All right, some of the resources out there. You know, they actually just started a state association for Oregon. Big leaf maple up there. So precedent has now been set that a western state now has a maple producers association. So Utah could be next. Okay, so if you ever get enough groundswell, if there's enough people making syrup here, you know, you start a nonprofit association, then you belong to the North American Syrup Council, and there's a lot of benefits of that, of all the information you gain and being part of that group. So they're really good. And they have good websites with good information as well. Vermont and New York are 2 of the best. So you can check out those association websites and just see like what kind of stuff they offer their producers and how that's helping. 2 best programs out there, university-wise, you know, besides USU, of course, for maple syrup, is Cornell has the maple program, and UVM. Those are the 2 big university maple research and education programs. You know, I left Cornell 7 years ago. There's really good guys there now. Came after me, and you know, they put on great programs and really good information. The equipment suppliers, they always have open houses at the end of April. If you really get into it someday, you know, you catch the bug sometimes, and you're like, I expect you sometime on the East Coast, Greg, you know, because at the end of April, you have these open houses, and there's tons of information and all the seminars, and you get to see all the equipment. It's great. Maple Manager is a new website that's more geared towards if you're doing it as a business, though. Maple News, Maple Digest, 2 publications. Those are like the standard industry trade publications. This is the book I wrote 10 years ago or 12 years ago. It's been a while. This is also from maple, birch, and walnut trees. So a lot of this work I did at Cornell was not just on maple, but other types of tree species as well. And actually now we're looking at aspen. We're going to be setting up some aspen tubing tomorrow, looking at that. So, you know, there's lots of other trees you can tap as well. So, and the same thing goes with the walnut and the birch. Don't make syrup, just drink the sap and cook with the sap. Okay, you don't have enough out here.
Are there any oak species you can tap?
No, they don't have sap. Okay, so next steps, you know, those questions earlier, you know, basically it's like, what do you want to do? How much time you have? How much money are you willing to spend? What kind of resources do you already have? And what do you want to do? You know, what kind of trees can you get access to? Think about all that stuff, like, and how like sugaring could really, how you could incorporate it into your life. You know, especially for March and April. Is this going to be a hobby that's going to be a really great thing for you to do then? And how do you want to structure it to be most enjoyable for you? You know, do the thorough assessment. If you're gonna do as a business, you do a SWOT analysis: strengths, weaknesses, opportunities, threats. Think about through all those for if you're gonna do it as a business someday. And if you do that, you got to do a business plan. Yeah.
So I think for like
said about, we can expect about 5 gallons
Yeah.
of sap
Over the course of the season.
of the season.
4 to 6 weeks, 5 gallons of sap on average.
So, and then it's about 40 to 1.
Yep.
For boiling it down to syrup.
Yep.
So you could probably expect about 2 8-ounce bottles of syrup per tree then. Or what would you say?
Yeah, I would say probably 1.
1?
Yeah. So fir trees have a different type of sap that's like really like resiny. The sap that comes out of the tree is mostly water. Yeah, like I'm not talking about drinking resin. Like when you can't really tell the difference between sap and water from a maple tree. You can once you drink it. It tastes a little sweet. You got the extra mineral flavor, but like any conifer tree does have sap, which is more like a resin that, it's got the same name, but obviously much different product. You had a question?
So when exactly is tapping season?
Well, it's in about 1 hour, we're going to be tapping trees, okay? But really, it's more like late February, beginning March. It's whenever, every year is different. It's when winter's turning to spring. And so you need to have, several days in the 40s at least to get the sap really flowing, get the trees thawed out. You get like 1 day of 40 degrees in February, you're not really going to get much. But starting in early March, when you get like extended periods where it's still freezing at night but getting warm in the 40s, maybe 50 during the day, that's when the sap's going to start flowing.
Do you set up your taps now and wait, or do you set them up in the cold?
You can set up your tubing now. And that's what we're going to do this afternoon, is set up the tubing, and then you drill the holes when you want to collect the sap. Yeah.
When you drill the hole and you put the tap in, you just like leave it there for the 6 weeks and
Yeah.
then come back and you've got 5 gallons of sap?
No, you don't. You go back every day. The sap's
You go
flowing.
back every day.
Every day the sap's flowing to go
You're gonna
collect it.
You're not going to leave it there in a bucket. You're going to go and collect
You're going to go collect it and do something with it. Either boil it down or drink it or cook with it or freeze it, whatever you want to do.
So if you're just getting a little bit every day and you're trying to get 5 gallons for the season, you have to boil that little bit every time because it's not going to last. It's not like you can collect all the sap, or could you freeze it? And
You
then
can
like
freeze it and then
again?
thaw it out. Yeah,
Okay.
I'm just going to tell you, and I'll say it for probably the 50th time. You should buy the syrup. Okay, if you're going to do that, it's so much work. Okay.
Just drink the water.
Yeah. Okay. But if you want to boil some down, do it. But you're going to have. Let's just say you have 5 trees. How many trees do you? You don't have any trees. Okay. Let's say, depending on how many trees you get. Let's say you get 5 trees, which I think you can get. Where do you live?
Ogden,
Okay. In
an hour north of here.
Okay, is it like a residential area?
Yeah.
Okay. So people have trees in their backyards, right? Front yards. Yeah. Right. There's probably maple trees planted all around. Walk around to your neighbors and ask them, do you mind? And you're going to wind up with as many trees as you are willing to ask people and you're willing to collect the sap. I think that your limiting factor is not going to be the trees. If you're in a residential neighborhood in Ogden, in my limited time in Utah, every community I've been in, there've been maple trees planted. They're usually either Norway maple, there might be big tooth maple, might be silver maple, there's sometimes sugar maple or red maple. But there's lots of maple trees planted all over these residential neighborhoods. And they're likely going to let you tap them. So it's a matter of your limiting factor is going to be how many people you want to go ask and then how many you want to go collect. And then once you have the sap, your limiting factor is going to be how much time do I have to boil it? Because it's going to take a long time unless you invest in something that's going to do it quickly and it's going to then cost a lot of money. It's always the trade-off there.
Mike,
Yeah.
you can freeze it, right?
Yes.
And so what I've done personally, and then do a boil at the end.
And the other great thing to do about freezing it You should be checking on it when you're freezing it and periodically taking the ice that's forming and throwing that out. Because there's very little sugar in that ice. The sugar stays in the sap, the ice, the water freezes, and you might have wind up with like 0.1 or 0.2% sugar in that ice. It's not worth it. It's called the poor man's reverse osmosis, okay? That's what you do. It's freeze concentration. And you can do that, like if you have a 5-gallon pail in a chest freeze, you can put it in there. It's going to start to freeze, take that ice out, do it again. There's less to boil.
Here every night, why not?
Or leave it outside.
Line of buckets on your back porch.
Yeah, exactly. Like you just do, you can't let it freeze solid, but yeah, you can just outside at night. You don't need a chest freezer. It depends on, if it only gets to 30 degrees, 29, 30 degrees, it's not really going to freeze it that hard. It gets down to 20, that's starting to work. But 29 or 30, it's just going to kind of stay cold, but not really ice. Yep.
Okay, so bugs are kind of dead in that season anyways, but like how do you prevent things from crawling into your syrup and eating it?
Into this sap?
Yeah.
Yep. Well, yeah, you strain it out. I showed you the picture of that paint strainer that goes on the 5-gallon pail when you go to pour it in there.
That was a food grade paint strainer, right?
Of course. I had just used it for spackling. But there's very little bugs until the end of the season. And then at the end of the season, you get lots of moths and flies that come in there. Other animals, like there's pictures I've seen of like, if it's at the edge of a pasture, like the cow's going to go over and just drink it all. But, you don't have that.
You ever try cottonwood? An awful lot of water comes out of one when you get into one.
Yes, and because it's a populous species, and we're actually, that's Populus deltoides. We have done some on the West Coast with cottonwood. We're doing aspen tomorrow. Yeah.
So it works? It's tasty?
With vacuum. You have to have vacuum. And the syrup is good. Aspen syrup.
Sometimes, I understand why you have to have vacuum. Sometimes you saw into a cottonwood and it's a river bottom and gallons and it just comes gushing right out of the tree.
Yeah.
Gallons and gallons of water, of sap, I assume.
Yep. At what time of the year?
Didn't make that correlation.
Okay.
Not much.
Yeah. Certainly more research should be done on that. Yep.
Is there a cheap way to do vacuum? Because I have two
Yes.
big cottonwoods in my yard.
Oh.
And I was like, I could do that.
Yeah, the cheap way to do it is to use 3/16 tubing and then run it downhill.
Oh, okay.
So if the problem you might have is that you said they're in your yard, you're not on a plateau with a cliff though, right? So that's the, actually I do have a video, if I can find it, there's a way you can do, they use a professor in Washington, because the limiting factor in Washington is that they don't get enough freezes. And if you don't have freezes, bless you, you can get sap with vacuum. Well, it just needs to be above freezing. So she developed, it was a thing for bleeding brake pads, I think. Bleeding brake lines or something that you can, and hook that up to a glass jar with the tubing into there. She had 2 ports, and she created a vacuum with that. Yeah. I'll try to find that video. You could try that. But you can get good vacuum that way if you. The aspen syrup I've had has been very good. I never had any cottonwood syrup. But they're both Populus is the genus. Just like Acer, all Acer tastes about the same. All Betula, all birch, whether it's a river birch or yellow birch or paper birch, it all tastes about the same. I would think cottonwood would be similar to aspen, but there really isn't enough research on that. I couldn't. Yeah, the 5 gallons I was talking about was with big tooth maple on a hill. A yard tree, a healthy yard tree that gets irrigated, you can expect 10 to 15 gallons of sap. If it's a nice big yard tree, healthy yard tree, and especially if it's a sugar maple or red maple. I have seen plenty of those planted around. So just go for a drive, go for a bike ride, whatever. Check out the neighborhood. All right. I don't want to hold us over for lunch. We're 7 minutes over. Yeah. Yep. Oh,